We're on to part 4 of Psalms today. So this is Psalm 76 up to Psalm 100. Again, doing these in 25 Psalm chunks. It happens so that in this one, that I haven't made a great deal of notes on this one. So I think this might be a light-hearted one. We'll see. I don't always know what I'm going to talk about as I start these things. So we'll see where we go. Psalm 78 is a very long account of the cycles of the Israelites sinning and then God having to come and sort of rescue them again, as it were. We talked about that before, obviously, and it's an interesting idea. But it reminded me of an interview I saw recently with Chris Pratt, the actor, and a very open Christian, bravely so, I think, actually. The way Christians talk about language in secular world, it's difficult to hear, isn't it? So actually it's an interesting one. But Chris Pratt was talking about things going wrong in his life, and he'd asked God, please sort this out, and all the rest of it, and pledging his allegiance to God as a result, or rather in offer of the result. Then getting the result and then backing out on the promise again, and this happening over in cycles. I just thought that was really interesting. It gives you sort of real world context, because in the scope of how it's written in the Bible, as I've talked about before, it sounds kind of ridiculous, but yeah, you know, when you remove it from that context and put it into real life, yeah, okay, and it's maybe not false gods and crazy things, unless false gods are just different priorities, but yeah, no, that's a really interesting idea. It ends anyway on talking about David shepherding them, as in the Israelites, with integrity of heart. Again, that's David being a sinner. It's integrity of heart, maybe a different thing from being a non-sinny person. Don't know. Psalm 80, it's asked for God to come back and save the Israelites, likening them to a vine that God has planted and it's been ravaged by insects. Seemingly with no confession of culpability in this context. It's almost talking like God has just abandoned everybody and not done a very good job, whereas it's like, no, actually, it was pretty clear in the Bible so far, it was the Israelites were pretty terrible, and that's why God left. I mean, obviously there'll be some individuals who weren't terrible, presumably. But yeah, it does seem to put it all on God and a little bit demanding. It also, though, talks in Psalm 80 about... the quote is, let your hand rest on the man at your right hand, the Son of Man you have raised up for yourself. This sort of seems, yeah, fine, la-di-da in the Bible, but I happen to have known in advance that Son of Man is a title ascribed to Jesus, and we're hundreds of years from Jesus yet, and it doesn't seem to be talking about Jesus. Yeah, so I don't quite know what to do with that. And how do you separate Son of Man Jesus from Son of Man someone else, whoever this is talking about? It's really difficult, those ones, to work out. And I guess from the context of someone sitting down trying to be open-minded about reading the Bible and seeing whether it might be true, you're not doing a proper thorough job, I think, if you don't ask the question as a result of these sort of things of, is the New Testament a made-up story that harks back to prophecies or claims in the Old Testament and then presents them as prophecies, like, yes, this is talking about Son of Man, and here's now the Son of Man, and make it look like something's true over hundreds of years. I'm not that sceptical, I'm not cynical, that's not an accusation against Christianity or anything like that. But I mean, if you're taking this scrutiny seriously, you've got to ask questions like that, or you're just somewhat deluding yourself, I think, and just covering your eyes and hoping for it to be true. So yeah, it doesn't help in terms of knowing what to do with that, but things like that I think you have to give kind of a hard time and wrestle with. Psalm 81, it seems to be spoken from God's perspective, and if we just did as we were told, how quickly I would subdue your enemies, or their enemies. Obviously this is not actually God speaking, this is someone writing as God might speak, so yeah, and I guess in that respect it reflects the theme running throughout all of this, that people just ascribe all events to God. So if you're being oppressed by your enemies, as far as they're concerned, it's because you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Chances are people are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, but it begs the question, if they were doing what they were supposed to be doing, would they still be oppressed by enemies? Because would that make a difference? I don't know. Another interesting one here, Psalm 90, I read it and didn't even bother making any notes for it. But I was talking to a lady the other day who said that Psalm 90 is her favourite psalm. And that's not to say that I disagree or anything like that. That's not what I mean. My point is that how people see different things differently. So, obviously, so I read Psalm 90 and go, yeah, great, skip over, move on to the next one. And she read it and picked out of 150, that's her favourite one. Assuming she's read them all, but sounds like she has. So, yeah, I guess what the Bible says to me in this context is nothing. What it says to her is profound. So it's interesting how different bits will say different things to different people, perhaps even at different times. So it made me realise, actually, yes, okay, it's not necessarily saying the same thing to everybody. So quite interesting. And then Psalm 91 is another example of the idea that you do right and life will be very easy. But again, it's that idea that unless we're talking in much bigger context than human lifespans, then it's not a particularly helpful thing to claim because it doesn't seem to be true. I may get if there is an eternity after here, then it could be corrected there. But there's nothing in the Bible so far to say that's the case. The only hint we've had of stuff, I think, where we've had Elijah taken up to heaven, but we don't know what that means or what happened with that. We don't know that that's a good thing, even that he's okay. And we had Samuel, who did a post-death appearance via a medium, who seemed to be sort of annoyed at being called up from watching Netflix or whatever he was doing. It's just some sort of enduring thing. But nothing I'm aware of that I can recall has actually been stated that you die, something else happens afterwards. So I don't know. But yeah, we'll carry on and do the next 25. This will take us into the back half of Psalms and we'll see what we get from that.